So I got a question for you. How many people here are afraid of rejection? Raise your hand. Okay, it should be about everyone because I think rejection is something that we all struggle with at least sometimes in our life because it's a primal, impulsive thing to want to be included. Because if we're included, we're safe. We're part of the tribe. Lions can't get us. But if we're rejected, then we're cast out. We're ejected. We're alone. And if we're alone, then the lions can eat us. We all have a fundamental need to want to belong to the tribe, to the group, and we're terrified of being rejected because to be alone, to be rejected, actually is the same fear of dying. That's how big it is for us. And until we do some work around our fears of rejection, and until we start to understand some of the things that are true and not true about rejection, then we're always going to carry this fear around. And as long as we carry this fear of rejection around, it's going to limit us in our relationships, in our personal growth, our success, and our overall well-being in life. So today I want to talk to you about rejection and how you can sort of rejection-proof your own life. Now, I used to struggle with the fear of rejection terribly, especially when I was a kid growing up. I think this trauma goes all the way back to my childhood. I remember as a kid wanting to sell raffle tickets for my baseball team, and I was terrified. I was terrified of asking people if they would buy one of my raffle tickets because if they said no to me, that meant they didn't like me. And if they didn't like me enough to buy my raffle ticket, well, that meant I was a loser. And if I was a loser, that meant I was alone. And I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to feel like a loser. What I did was I just didn't ask anybody. And the result was basically the same. Nobody bought my tickets, and I still felt like a loser. I also remember that my dad tried to help me out with this. Again, I don't know, I'm probably like in fifth grade or something like that, T-ball. And my dad called around to some of his friends because I wanted to be able to sell enough raffle tickets in order to get a prize. And the prize was a baseball, and I wanted the baseball. I wanted to be able to go to my practice and say, yeah, I sold enough tickets to be able to get the baseball. So my dad, he decided he was going to help me out. He called a bunch of his friends and he said, hey, I'm going to bring Chuck over. He's going to ask you to buy a raffle ticket. He's going to ask you to buy a raffle ticket. And so they had pretty much already agreed to buy these tickets. I just needed to go over and make the ask. My dad drove me around to all of his friends, and I remember knocking on the door and feeling terrified. Here I'm this little kid, and there are these big people, and I'm like, will you buy a raffle ticket? And they're like, sure. And then they would write me the check or give me the cash or whatever, and I'd give them the raffle ticket. And away I would go. Now, the very last person on the list was somebody that my dad knew, but he couldn't get a hold of, but he thought that this guy would buy a raffle ticket from me. I went up to the door. I knocked on the door, and it was this older guy, and he was just really gruff. So, what do you want? I'm like, hey, buy a raffle ticket. He said, no, I don't want any raffle tickets. Get out of here. And he slammed the door, and I walked away feeling very confused and sheepish in fear because the worst thing that could have happened to me actually happened. I was rejected. And of course, my dad tried to console me, but it stuck with me. Even now, as I'm recalling this story, it's a very strong visual that I'm getting about that feeling of this thing that happened to me when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And probably you have some kind of experience like that as well. I want to give you 3 things that might help you, some tools that you can use to help overcome your fear of rejection and help you to be more assertive in life. Because I think one of the qualities every man should be that we're assertive, that we're able to face the fears, the things, even the fear of being rejected, and go forward, face that fear, overcome it, and be assertive. And when we're assertive, we're living from that higher masculine energy. To be assertive means to be courageous. And you start to realize a couple of things about rejection. And the first one that I recognized is this, is that rejection doesn't actually hurt. What hurts is my perception or my belief about the rejection. My belief has always been that if somebody rejects me, if I'm trying to give them something and they reject that, or if I'm trying to ask them for something and they tell me no, that's a reflection of me. That's a reflection of how that person feels about me. In other words, they think that I'm a loser. And if they think I'm a loser, all that does is add more evidence to this core belief that says I'm a loser. And when I feel like a loser, what I do then is I don't ask for my needs to be met. And when I don't ask for my needs to be met, I'm safe, I'm not getting rejected, but I'm also in the exact same space that if I was rejected, I feel like a loser. The second point I want to make here is that rejection isn't about you. It's about the other person. It's about what they want, what they don't want. And it's all about preferences. Now, you have preferences and other people have preferences. And just because you have a preference for something doesn't mean that you're rejecting the other thing. For example, if you go to Baskin Robbins and there's 31 flavors of ice cream and you choose one kind of ice cream, there's 30 other ice creams there that are rejected. Is it that you don't like them? Maybe some, but mostly it's about your preference. You like this one particular type of ice cream in this one particular moment, and you decide to get that. So you have preferences and other people have preferences, and you might not be somebody else's preference. And that's okay because, after all, not everybody else is your preference. That's just part of being human. And that leads me to point number 3. And point number 3 is rejection is part of life. Look, you're not going to get through life without being rejected. It's going to happen. And when it does, it's going to hurt. But if I get used to rejection, in fact, if I go out and I start to seek to be rejected, what would that be like? Well, pretty soon you would probably start to develop a tolerance for being rejected. A couple of years ago, I read a book called Rejection Proof by a man named Rejection. And in the book, he tells the story of how he developed rejection proof. What he did was he decided he was going to go around and ask people ridiculous things, and probably that they would say no. And the more that they said no, then he would maybe develop more of a thick skin and become rejection proof. The first experiment, he asked his doorman for $100 and the doorman said no. And there was his rejection. And then another time he'd knock on a neighbor's door and he had a soccer ball with him and he asked his neighbor, "Can I go play soccer in your backyard?" And the neighbor said yes. And he went out and kicked the ball around for a while and came back and he asked his neighbor, "Why did you let me do that?" And his neighbor said, "It was such a weird request, I couldn't say no." Judging went around and he started asking more and more people for things that he thought he would get rejected for. And what ended up happening was the more the ridiculous the ask was, the more people actually wanted to help him. And that's the point of the entire story, is that people actually want to help you. If you're dealing with fear right now, if you're dealing with a sense of worried about being rejected, maybe it's a promotion you want, or maybe going after a job, or maybe it's asking a girl out on a date, or maybe it's just getting back on the dating apps. You're afraid of rejection, and that's what's keeping you back. That's what's keeping you from moving forward in your life. Anyway, that's what I got for you today. I hope this was helpful. Please like and subscribe and share, and I'll see you next time.